The silence in the house was a physical thing. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that had settled over everything the moment the police car pulled away from the curb. I could still see the flash of red and blue lights staining the walls of our living room, a final, garish smear on a life that had just been torn in two. I sat on the floor, my back against the sofa, my knees pulled to my chest. The plush beige carpet, which I had chosen for its warmth and cheerfulness, now felt gritty and cold. It was in this spot, right here, that David had knelt just 3 nights ago, his hands on my shoulders, his forehead pressed to mine, and told me he had to work late. His eyes, those familiar blue eyes I had looked into for a decade, had held mine with such steady conviction. I had believed every word. A floorboard creaked and I flinched, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was only Isaiah. He moved through the house like a ghost, his large frame usually so commanding now subdued with a careful grief. He had arrived within an hour of my frantic, broken phone call, and he had not left my side since. He did not try to fill the silence with empty words, for which I was profoundly grateful. Instead, he performed small, practical miracles. He answered the phone, turning away reporters with a voice like granite. He ordered groceries that appeared at the door, and he made tea that I did not drink. "Evelyn," he said now, his voice low and gentle. He lowered himself to the floor beside me, not touching me, just offering his presence. "You need to eat something. I have made soup." I shook my head, my chin resting on my knees. The thought of food was absurd. How could my body require something as mundane as sustenance when my entire world had collapsed into a pile of ash and lies? David. David was in a jail cell. The father of my children, my husband, was arrested for embezzlement. Fraud. The words echoed in my head, sharp and clinical, not fitting the man I knew, or the man I thought I knew. "The children," I whispered, the words scraping my throat raw from all the crying I had done, and all the crying I had yet to do. "They are with Mom," Isaiah said. "They are safe. They are asking for you, but they are safe." Safe, what did that word even mean anymore? My son Liam, who worshipped his father, who wore a tiny little suit to go to work with Daddy every Saturday morning. My daughter Chloe, with her father's eyes. What would I tell them? How could I possibly explain that the hero in their story was actually the villain? A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. I had to protect them. That was the only clear thought in the murky swamp of my mind. "I need to see him," I said, the decision forming suddenly. "I have to look at him and ask him why." Isaiah shifted. "Evie, are you sure that is a good idea? You are in shock. You need time to process this." "Process what?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time, edged with a hysteria I did not recognize. "What is there to process, Isaiah? My husband is a criminal. He stole from his own partners, from our friends. He lied to me. For years, it seems. What more processing is required?" The anger felt good. It was a hot, clean flame compared to the cold, heavy grief. It was something to hold on to. Isaiah was silent for a long moment. He looked at me, his dark eyes full of a pain that was both for me and for the situation. "Then I will drive you," he said simply. He would not let me face this alone. The county jail was a brutalist rectangle of gray concrete, a place designed to stamp out hope. The air inside smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. Every sound, the clang of a metal door, the buzz of a lock disengaging, made me jump. I sat on a hard plastic chair in a visitation room, staring at the thick glass partition. Isaiah stood behind me, a silent sentinel. My hands were clenched in my lap, my nails digging half-moons into my palms. Then a door on the other side of the glass opened, and he was there. David looked smaller. The expensive, tailored suit he always wore was gone, replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung off his shoulders. His face was pale, stubbled with a beard he would never normally have allowed. But his eyes were the same. Tired, haunted, but still the same blue eyes. He looked at me, and a world of apology was in that glance. I felt nothing but a cold, hard stone in my stomach. He picked up the phone on his side. I watched my own hand, trembling, reach for the receiver on mine. It felt cold and heavy. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice was cracked, broken. "I am so sorry." The words were so inadequate they were almost insulting. Sorry for what? For getting caught? For ruining our lives? "Why?" I asked. My voice did not sound like my own. It was flat, devoid of all the emotion that was churning inside me. "Just tell me why, David." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. "It was for us, for you, for the kids. I wanted to give you everything. The house, the private schools, the life you deserved. Do not, I hissed, the flatness vanishing, replaced by a white-hot rage. Do not you dare use us as your excuse. I never asked for a mansion, David. I asked for a husband who came home for dinner. I asked for a father who was present for his children. We had enough. We had more than enough. The image of our life, the beautiful, glossy facade, now seemed like a grotesque stage set. Every vacation, every new car, every birthday party had been paid for with stolen money. It was all tainted. It got away from me, he whispered, his gaze dropping to the counter. It started small, just a temporary loan I was going to pay back. Then the market shifted, I had to cover it up. It just snowballed. Snowballed, I repeated, tasting the word. It was such a gentle, almost playful term for the avalanche that had buried us. How long, David? How long have you been lying to me? He could not look at me. 5 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 5 years. Half of our marriage. Liam was just a baby. Chloe was not even born. My entire adult life, the foundation upon which I had built my happiness, was a deliberate, sustained fraud. I thought I had been building a home, but I had been living in a house of cards, and David had known the whole time that a single gust of wind would bring it all down. All of it, I said, more to myself than to him. It was all a lie. Not all of it, he pleaded, his eyes snapping back to mine, desperate now. Evelyn, I love you. That was never a lie. You have to believe that. I stared at him, at this stranger in an orange jumpsuit. The man I loved would never have done this. The man I loved was a careful, principled, honest man. That man, I realized with a devastating clarity, had never existed. He was a character David had played for me. I do not know who you are, I said, and the truth of those words was the most painful thing I had ever spoken. I do not know you at all. I saw the hope drain from his face. It was replaced by a bleak acceptance. I had taken the one thing he was clinging to and shattered it. What will you do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at him for a long moment, at the ruins of the man I had vowed to spend my life with. I thought of my children, asleep in their grandparents' house, innocent victims of a crime they could not possibly understand. I thought of the future, a vast, terrifying emptiness. I do not know, I said, and it was the truth. I placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click was final. I stood up, my legs weak, and turned my back on him. I did not look back. Isaiah's hand was on my elbow, guiding me, holding me upright as we walked out of that room, away from the ghost of my husband. The sunlight outside was shockingly bright. I blinked against it, feeling like a creature emerging from a cave. The world was still turning. Cars were still driving by. People were living their normal, unbroken lives. It felt wrong. Isaiah helped me into the passenger seat of his car. He did not start the engine right away. We just sat in the quiet of the parking lot. Evelyn, he began, his voice cautious. I cannot, I interrupted, staring straight ahead. I cannot talk about it yet. He nodded and started the car. The drive home was silent. My mind was not silent, though. It was a raging storm of questions, but they were no longer about the past. They were about the future. What would I do? The question David had asked hung in the air. Could I stand by him? Could I take my children to visit their father in prison for the next decade? Could I ever forgive such a fundamental, years-long betrayal? We pulled into the driveway of my beautiful, empty house, the house his crime had built. Isaiah came around and opened my door. As I stepped out, my foot kicked something on the pavement. I looked down. It was a small, brightly colored wooden bird, one of Chloe's toys. She must have dropped it. I bent down and picked it up, the smooth paint feeling familiar and heartbreaking in my hand. I looked from the toy in my hand to the grand facade of the house, and then back to my brother's worried face. A terrible, clear certainty began to crystallize in the chaos of my mind. Isaiah, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I know what I have to do. The words hung between us, full of a finality that scared me more than anything else that had happened that day. The silence in the study was a physical presence, thick and heavy with all the words we had already spoken and all the ones we never would. Outside the tall windows, the city lights glittered, a cold and distant galaxy that had nothing to do with the warmth that had once lived within these walls. I stood by the fireplace, my back to the room, tracing the familiar grain of the mantelpiece with a finger. It was a relic from a different life, a life where Marcus and I would debate which books deserved the prime spot here, where the only sounds were the crackle of logs and the soft turning of pages. I heard him enter. I did not need to turn. I knew the weight of his step, the slight hesitation in his breath. He stopped a few feet behind me, and I could feel his gaze on my back. The air shifted, charged with the unspoken finality of this moment. "You are packed," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of the anger that had fueled our previous encounters. It was worse, this calm. It was the quiet after the storm, when all that remains is the assessment of the wreckage. "I am. The car will be here soon." I finally turned to face him. He looked older. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, etched not by laughter but by the strain of these past few months. He was still the Marcus I had loved, the man with the kind eyes and the steady hands, but he was a monument to that man, weathered and distant. He gestured vaguely toward the leather armchairs that flanked the cold hearth. "Shall we? One last time." It was not a question of comfort, but of ritual. We had sat in these chairs for 1,000 conversations, for planning our future, for sharing our days. It felt obscene to use them for this, for the dismantling of that future, but also necessary. A symmetry to the end. I nodded and took my usual seat. He took his. A chasm of polished floorboards lay between us. "I went to the office today," he began, his eyes fixed on the empty fireplace. "I cleared out your things, your mug, the photograph from the trip to Maine." A sharp pain, quick and precise as a needle, pierced my chest. That photograph. We were both windswept and smiling, squinting against the sun, the Atlantic a vast blue expanse behind us. I had insisted on framing it for his desk. "To remind you that there is a world outside of those spreadsheets," I had teased. Now it was in a box, a relic of a forgotten civilization. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I would not have known what to do with it." "That makes two of us." He finally looked at me, and his gaze was clear, unbearably so. There was no blame in it anymore, no pleading, just a profound, exhausted acceptance. "I do not think I can ever understand it, Evelyn. I have tried. I have gone over every moment, every conversation, looking for the crack. Was it something I said? Something I did not say?" My throat tightened. How could I explain the slow, insidious chill that had settled in my bones? It was not one thing. It was the 1,000 tiny silences that grew into a wall between us. It was the way our dreams had quietly diverged, mine stretching toward a horizon he no longer wished to see. It was the terrifying realization that the person I was becoming could not live within the life we had built together. To say it aloud would have been cruel. It would have sounded like a list of his failures, when it was nothing of the sort. It was a story of my own becoming, and my becoming required a solitude he could not be part of. "It was not you, Marcus," I said, forcing the words out. "It was me. I know how hollow that sounds, but it is the truth. The person you married, she started to feel like a character I was playing. A comfortable, beloved character, but a character nonetheless. And every day I stayed, the more I felt I was betraying not just you, but myself." He absorbed this, his jaw working slightly. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and studied his hands. Those capable hands that had built businesses, that had held me, that were now empty. So it was a lie, all of it. "No," I said, the word sharp, desperate. "The love was never a lie. It was real. It is real. But love is not always enough to bridge the gap between two people who are walking different paths. Our paths have split, Marcus. We have been walking side by side but toward different destinations for a long time, and we can no longer pretend the paths are the same." He let out a long, slow breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of our entire shared history. "Acknowledgement," he said quietly, "not reconciliation. Is that what this is?" "I think it is the only honest thing left," I replied, my own voice trembling. "Reconciliation would be another performance. We would be acting the parts of a healed couple, all the while knowing the foundation is gone. This clear-eyed goodbye, it is a terrible kindness compared to that." "A kindness," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He looked around the study, at the shelves lined with our commingled books, at the rug we had chosen together on a rainy afternoon. "It does not feel kind." "It is not, but it is clean." The word hung in the air between us. Clean. It suggested a severance without ragged edges, a wound that could heal properly if left alone. We sat in silence for a long time, the clock on the mantel ticking away the final minutes of our life together. There was nothing left to say. Every possible avenue had been explored, every argument exhausted. All that remained was the quiet, devastating truth of our situation. Outside, the purr of a car engine broke the stillness. My ride, the sound was a guillotine falling. I stood up, my legs feeling weak. Marcus rose too, a gentleman to the last. He did not move to hug me. He did not offer a hand. We stood there, two strangers in the familiar landscape of our home. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion he would not name. "I do not know yet," I answered honestly. "A hotel tonight, then I will figure it out." It was the first true freedom I had felt in years, and it was terrifying. He simply nodded. "Be safe, Evelyn." It was the way he said my name. Not with anger, not with love, but with a final, solemn respect. It was the closure we needed. It was the acknowledgement that the story of Marcus and Evelyn was over. I picked up my single suitcase, the one that held the fragments of my old life I deemed essential for whatever came next. I walked to the door of the study without looking back. I could not look back. If I saw the pain in his eyes one more time, my resolve might crumble. I was at the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, when his voice stopped me one last time. It was softer now, stripped bare. "Evelyn." I turned. He was standing in the doorway of the study, silhouetted by the lamplight. His face was in shadow. "The man you are becoming," he said, and there was a strange, new gravity in his tone. "I hope he is worth it." The words landed like a blow. He did not say it with malice, but with a prophetic weight that made my blood run cold. He was not talking about a vague future. He was talking about a specific person. He knew. He had to know. I had been so careful, but he knew there was someone else waiting in the wings, a catalyst if not a cause. And in that moment, the clean break I had envisioned suddenly felt dangerously, terrifyingly complicated. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the night, the weight of his unanswered question following me into the dark. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the house, but it was a different aroma from the cloying, overpowering sweetness of the year before. This was subtler, earthier. A single garland wound its way up the banister, dotted with simple white lights. In the living room, the tree stood not as a monstrous beacon of excess, but as a quiet, dignified presence, decorated with ornaments that had history, that told stories. The ones Sarah and I had made from painted pasta when she was a child were nestled beside a few delicate glass baubles from my own mother. There was no towering, glittering monstrosity. This tree had scars, bare patches where branches were less full, and I found I loved it more for its honest imperfections. It had been a year since the world I thought I knew had shattered into a million pieces on this very spot. The ghost of that other party lingered in the air, a cold draft beneath the warmth I was trying so hard to cultivate. I could still see the garish red of Daniel's sweater, the flash of Amelia's nervous smile as she handed me that cursed bottle of wine. I could still feel the phantom weight of the crumpled receipt in my hand, the ink staining my fingers with the truth. Sarah moved through the rooms, setting out plates of food that were generous but not extravagant. A glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, roasted vegetables. There were no canapés that looked like modern art, no hired servers weaving through the crowd with silver trays. It was just us. My brother, Mark, was already here, a steady, grounding presence by the fireplace, nursing a mug of coffee. His wife, Linda, was arranging a cheese plate in the kitchen, her movements calm and practical. Their quiet support had been my anchor through the storm of lawyers, paperwork, and the hollow silence of a half-empty house. The doorbell rang, a soft chime that sent a jolt through me, a conditioned response from a lifetime of expecting a different arrival. I smoothed the simple dark green dress I had chosen, a far cry from the sequined outfit of last year, and went to answer it. Amelia stood on the porch, her face etched with a nervous hope that made my heart ache. She held a baking dish covered in foil. "I made the sweet potato casserole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one with the pecans on top. You always said it was your favorite." I stepped aside to let her in. "Thank you, Amelia. It is good to see you." It was the truth, but it was a complicated truth, layered with the memory of her confession, the pain in her eyes when she told me she had known about Daniel's affair for months, too terrified of destroying our family to speak. Our friendship had become a delicate thing, a piece of porcelain that had been broken and painstakingly glued back together. The cracks were still visible, and probably always would be, but it was no longer in shards on the floor. "The house looks beautiful, Evelyn," she said, her eyes taking in the modest decorations. "It feels peaceful." "It is a different kind of Christmas," I replied, and she nodded, understanding the volumes contained in that simple statement. The afternoon passed in a gentle, quiet rhythm. We ate, we talked. The conversation was not the loud, performative banter of previous years, but something softer, more genuine. We spoke about books we had read, a documentary Mark had seen, Linda's plans for her garden in the spring. The ghost of Daniel was a presence at the table, an empty chair that everyone carefully avoided looking at directly. His name was not spoken, but his absence was a chill in the room, a silence that echoed. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky a deep violet outside the windows, we gathered in the living room. The white lights on the tree twinkled, casting soft, dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah brought in a tray of hot chocolate, and we sat, a small circle in the dim light. It was Mark who finally gave voice to the unspoken. "It is good to be here, Evie," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is real, this is family." Tears pricked at my eyes, but they were not the harsh, angry tears of betrayal. They were something else, something born of a year of profound loss and a hard-won resilience. "It is," I agreed, my voice thick with emotion. "I was so afraid today would feel like a funeral, but it does not. It feels like a beginning." Amelia reached over and squeezed my hand. "He took a lot, Evelyn, but he did not take this. He could not take this." In that moment, surrounded by the people who had chosen to stay, who had chosen to help me rebuild, I felt a sense of peace I had not thought possible. The happiness of previous Christmases felt like a dream now, a gilded fantasy. This quiet contentment, this sense of survival, was more valuable. It was forged in fire, and it was real. Later, after Mark and Linda had said their goodbyes with long, warm hugs, and Amelia had departed with a promise to call tomorrow, I stood with Sarah in the hallway. The house was quiet again, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft crackle from the dying embers in the fireplace. "I think Mom would have liked this," Sarah said softly, looking at the simple garland on the stairwell. "She never did like all of Dad's fuss." I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "She would have loved you," I whispered. "She would have been so proud of the woman you have become." We stood there for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. The pain of the past was not gone. It was a part of us now, a scar tissue that had hardened over the wound. But it no longer defined us. I moved to the living room to turn off the tree lights. As I bent down to unplug the cord, my gaze fell on the bookshelf, on a small, framed photo of Daniel and me on our wedding day. It was the only picture of him I had not put away. I had left it there as a test, to see if I could look at it without feeling the acid rise in my throat. As my fingers touched the switch, the doorbell rang again, a sharp, insistent sound in the silent house. Sarah and I exchanged a puzzled glance. "Who could that be?" she murmured. "Did Aunt Linda forget something?" I walked back to the front door, a faint sense of unease threading through my newfound peace. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. A man stood on the porch, silhouetted against the cold, starry night. He was hunched against the chill, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a coat that looked too thin for the weather. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, for the features to resolve from the shadows. It was Daniel. He looked gaunt, older. The confident charm he had always worn like a second skin was gone, replaced by a shivering uncertainty. His eyes, bloodshot and weary, met mine. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice was rough, broken. "I know I have no right to be here, but I had nowhere else to go." The cold night air rushed into the warm hallway, and I stood frozen on the threshold. The solid ground I had fought so hard to find suddenly turning to shifting sand beneath my feet.